to the Elevated Healthy channel, where we bring you content for your conscience that makes much sense. And you can call me Elevated Healthy as your host. And today we are going to reconvene with part two of Massacres in the United States history, live hidden truths and forgotten victims, untold massacres. So as you see on the screen, it is a massacre that happened on August 6th, 1855, termed Bloody Monday. And I'll get right into it. Bloody Monday occurred on August 6th, 1855, in Louisville, Kentucky, an election day, when Protestant mobs attacked German and Irish Catholic neighborhoods. The inset here, historical marker, Bloody Monday, Election Day, August 6th, 1855, known as Bloody Monday due to riots led by known nothing mobs. This political party was anti Catholic and nativist. Attacks on German immigrants east of downtown and Irish in the west caused at least 22 deaths, arson, and looting. Catholic Cathedral of the Assumption and St. Martin's Church were threatened with destruction. Historical marker, Bloody Monday. This was one of the worst anti immigrant massacres in United States history, instigated largely by the writings of Louisville Journal editor George Prentice, whose statue remained until 2018 in front of the Louisville, Kentucky Library. These riots grew out of the bitter rivalry between the Democrats and the anti immigrant Know Nothing Party. Multiple street fights raged, leaving 22 people dead, scores, scores injured, and much property destroyed by fire. Five people were later indicted, but none were convicted, and the victims were not compensated. So that is the Bloody Monday, the massacre of Irish and Catholic by Protestants. So there you have it. All right, so we're going to go to July 13th, 1863, the New York City draft riots and massacre. The New York City draft massacre riots were the largest civil insurrection in United States history besides the Civil War itself. White mobs attacked the African American community, committing murder and burning homes and institutions, including an orphanage. Wow, an orphanage. July 13th, 1863, New York City draft riots and massacre. On the anniversary of the New York City draft riots and massacre, July 13th to 1863, we share a teaching activity that helps students explore what Howard Zinn described as the most destructive period of civil violence in United States history. Lasting nearly a week, the riots were the largest civil insurrection in United States history besides the Civil War itself. Inset to the right here, rioters and federal troops clash. Zinn writes in chapter 10 of A People's History of the United States, the Conscription Act of 1863 provided that the rich could avoid military service. They could pay $300 or buy a substitute. In the summer of 1863, a song of the conscripts was circulated by thousands in the New York and other cities. One stanza, we're coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more. We leave our homes and firesides with bleeding hearts and sore. Since poverty has been our crime, we howl to thy decree. We are the poor and have no wealth to purchase liberty. When recruiting for the Army began in July 1863, A mob in New York wrecked the main recruiting station. Then, for 3 days, crowds of white workers marched through the city, destroying buildings, factories, streetcar lines, homes. The draft riots were complex, anti black, anti rich, anti Republican. From an assault on draft headquarters, the rioters went on to attacks on wealthy homes, then to the murder of African Americans. They marched through the streets, forcing factories to close, recruiting more members of the mob. They set the city's colored orphan asylum on fire. They shot, burned, and hanged African Americans they found in the streets. Many people were thrown into the rivers to drown. On the fourth day, Union troops returning from the Battle of Gettysburg came into the city and stopped the rioting. Perhaps 400 people were killed. No exact figures had ever been given, but the number of lives lost were greater than any other incident of domestic violence in United States history. Inset, Harper's Weekly illustration of the burning of the orphanage during the draft riots, source Digital Public Library of America. Let's see if we can zoom in on this. Oh, actually, it gives you a little picture. Okay, let's zoom in and see if we can get some more detail. Okay, wow. So they burned down an orphanage in New York City. African Americans, man, just trying to come up in life. And this is what happened. Let's take a look at that. I want y'all to harp on that. That is a orphanage full of children, burnt down. Okay. The Zinn Education Project offers a teaching activity called the Draft Riot Mystery by Rethinking Schools editor Bill Bigelow, that focuses on the conflict between recently arrived Irish immigrants and African Americans. Recently arrived Irish immigrants and African Americans. Okay. As Bigelow explains in the introduction to the lesson, one of the critical habits of the mind that students should develop throughout a U.S. history course is to respond to the social phenomena with why questions. They should begin from a premise that events help explanations, that people don't, for example, kill each other simply because they speak different languages, attend different churches, or have different skin colors. This activity takes the outrage just of the 1863 riots at its starting point and asks students to piece together clues to help account for the sudden explosion of rage. It's important to note that making explanation is different than making excuses. Here, we're asking students to try to understand the horrors committed, not to rationalize them. Okay, so this is the July 13, 1863 New York City draft, riots and massacre. Has anyone ever been taught this at any point in their lifetime? This is my first time ever hearing about this, ever. The New York City draft, riots and massacre. Over 400 people were killed. Over 400 people. A whole orphanage, man. I just had to take a moment on that one. That one hit me. All right. If y'all liking this content, please be sure to hit that hitchhike button for me if you don't mind, and share the live with your hive and get this information out to as many of those that would like to know more about information like this. All right, so 1812, 1864, Union soldiers massacred at Fort Pillow. On 1812, 1864, Confederate troops massacred over 500 surrendering Union soldiers at the Battle of Fort Pillow in Tennessee. The majority of Union troops killed were black soldiers serving in the U.S. Colored Troops, USCT. They were stationed with white troops at Fort Pillow under Major Lionel F. Booth, who was also killed in the fighting. The Confederate general Nathan Bedford Forrest, also infamous for being the first grand wizard of the early Ku Klux Klan, recorded the atrocity in a report. He described the Union soldiers attempting to surrender and how his men slaughtered them. News of the massacre traveled throughout the North and South. Remember Fort Pillow became a rallying cry for USCT soldiers, and the atrocity was used as propaganda by both sides of the Civil War. So, the Battle of Fort Pillow, how many of you have heard of this in any form, whether it be school or just from someone who knew about this? This is my first time hearing about this, that Confederate troops massacre 500 surrendering Union soldiers, but you have the who's that Secretary Hexelf who wants to reinstate a Confederate soldier, I mean general on a military post. But if now that you're reading this, kind of make you think twice and really question, you know, the intentions when you do things like that. So this is the April 12th, 1864 Union soldiers massacred at Fort Pillow. Uh, they surrendered and still got slaughtered. And General Nathan Bedford Forrest, first Grand Wizard of the early Ku Klux Klan. Okay, so again, if y'all liking what y'all hearing, share the live with your hive. Hit that hitchhike button, man. Thumbs up. November 29th, 1864, Sand Creek Massacre. On November 29th, 1864, a Colorado cavalry unit acting on orders from Colorado's governor, John Evans, and ignoring a white surrender flag flying just below a U.S. flag, brutally attacked Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, including Chief Black Kettle, middle row, seated third from the left photo. Middle row, seated third from the left. Okay, it must be this person right here, right there. Okay. And what became known as the Sand Creek Massacre. A year earlier, Black Kettle had visited Washington, where the commissioner of Indian Affairs had presented him with a 34-star flag, saying that soldiers would never fire on him as long as he flew the stars and stripes. The chief flew the flag above his teepee together with a white flag as a further sign of peace from Soul Society. As it explains, as is explained at the Sand Creek Massacre NPS site, over the course of 8 hours, the troops killed around 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho people, composed mostly of women, children, and the elderly. During the afternoon and following day, the soldiers wandered over the field, committing atrocities on the dead wow, before departing on the scene on December 1 to resume campaigning. Y'all hear that? They dead and they still ain't no telling what they was doing, man. Because when I read atrocities on the dead, what that sound like? And then you say you killed mostly women, children, and the elderly. Cowardly, if you ask me. You know what I'm saying? I ain't gonna say they, but those who committed these atrocities usually have a pattern. They like to take out women, children, people who ain't even really involved in warrior type battles. You know what I'm saying? But let's continue. Captain Silas Soule, kneeling in the photo on the right, raised an abolitionist family, ordered his troops to not participate in the attack and testified publicly about the massacre. Soule was assassinated the next year. So said kneeling on the right. Well, if I'm looking, it must be the guy with the hat. Or if we look in face, it could be this person here. So he got assassinated. In contemporary Colorado, the colonel in charge of the massacre, John Chivington, had a town named after him, and the governor Evans has a mountain named for him. As of this writing, Silas Soule's memory is not preserved with any official named entities. All right, so this is the November 29th, 1864, Sand Creek Massacre. Thank y'all for listening. All right, now we're moving on to December 9th, 1864, the Ebenezer Creek Massacre. On December 9th, 1864, on the march to Savannah, hundreds or thousands of African American families who had just escaped from slavery were left to drown by Sherman's army. This is referred to as the massacre at Ebenezer Creek. From an article in the Washington Post, I'll read that in a second, but let me read this landmark here. It says the march to see Ebenezer Creek, 1 mile north on December. Hold on, let me see if I can zoom in on that. Okay, I can. So we can read it together. So 1 mile north on December 9th, 1864, during the American Civil War, U.S. General Jeff C. Davis crossed Ebenezer Creek with his 14th Army Corps as it advanced toward Savannah during General William T. Sherman's march to the sea. Davis hastily removed the pontoon bridges over the creek, and hundreds of free slaves following his army drowned trying to swim the swollen waters to escape the pursuing Confederates. Following a public outcry, Secretary of War Edward Stanton met with Sherman and local black leaders in Savannah on January 12, 1865. 4 days later, President Lincoln approved Sherman's Special Field Orders number 15, confiscating over 400,000 acres of coastal property and redistributing it to its former slaves in 40-acre tracts. Erected for Civil War 150 commemoration by the Georgia Historical Society and the Georgia Department of Economic Development. So, when we read this last part again right here, I thought that was unique. President Lincoln approved Sherman's Special Field Order number 15, confiscating over 400,000 acres of coastal property and redistributing it to its former slaves in 40-acre tracts. Okay, how many knew about that? All right. Now, so from an article in the Washington Post on the pretense that there was likely to be fighting in front, the Negroes were told not to go upon the pontoon bridge until all the troops and wagons were over. A guard was detailed to enforce the order, recalled Colonel Charles Kerr of the 16th Illinois Cavalry in a speech 20 years after the incident. As soon as we were over the creek, orders were given to the engineers to take upon up the pontoons and not let a Negro cross. I sat upon my horse then and witnessed a scene the like of which I pray my eyes never see again. Just before sunrise, the refugees cried out as their escape route was pulled away from them. Moments later, Willard scouts rolled up from behind and opened fire. Hundreds of refugees rushed forward into the icy current. Several Union soldiers on the eastern bank tried to help, pushing logs out to the few refugees still swimming. In response to public outcry about the massacre, demands by black ministers to Secretary of War Edward Stanton and Union General William T. Sherman were heated and led to the short lived land distribution reconstruction known as Sherman's Special Field Order Number 15. This was one of many massacres in U.S. history. To introduce this event to middle and high school students, we recommend this young adult book, Crossing Ebenezer Creek by Tanya Bolden. For more resources below to teach about the abolition movement and the Reconstruction era. Right. So the December 9th, 1864 Ebenezer Creek Massacre. I encourage you all to read about that. All right. Memphis in May, anyone? Y'all ever heard that term? I know it's a whole event in Memphis called Memphis in May, but did you ever think that this is perhaps the reason why it's called Memphis in May? May 1 through 3, 1866. Here's why it's called Memphis in May. Memphis Massacre. Y'all ready for this? Put a like up if y'all ready for this. Put something in the chat. Cause I always talk about how Memphis is real crazy. Look at the origins. You about to learn about it right here. If y'all in the chat, put something in the chat. Let me know y'all ready for this story right here. So May 1 to 3, 1866, Memphis Massacre. From May 1 to 3 in 1866, white civilians and police killed 46 African Americans and injured many more while burning houses, schools, and churches in Memphis, Tennessee. No criminal proceedings were held for the instigators or perpetrators of atrocities committed during the Memphis Massacre, also referred to as the Memphis Riot. Here is a description of the riot in historical context by Lerone Bennett Jr. from Before the Mayflower, A History of Black America, pages 224 to 226. The land problem was linked to the larger problems of the South and the status of blacks. Nothing could be done with the conquered South until the status of blacks was settled. The reverse was also true. Nothing could be done for blacks until the status of the conquered South was settled. Lincoln's answer to this problem was liberal to the South. He wanted to readmit the Southern states as soon as 10% of the pre-war electorate had qualified by taking an oath of allegiance to America. Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, was substantially of the same mind. Neither man came to grips with the status of blacks, although Lincoln suggested that very intelligent blacks and Union veterans be given the right to vote. Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner were aghast at the presidential innocence. To turn the former slaves over to their former master without adequate safeguards, they contended would be madness. It was soon apparent that their apprehensions were all too well founded. For the conservative provisional governors appointed by President Johnson, organized by lily white governments with blatant pro-slavery biases, in 1865 and 1866, these governments enacted the Black Codes, which indicated that the South intended to reestablish slavery under another name. These codes restricted the rights of freemen under vagrancy and apprenticeship laws. South Carolina forbade freemen to follow any occupation except farming and menial service and required a special license to do other work. The legislature also gave masters the right to whip servants under 18 years of age. In other states, blacks could be punished for insulting gestures, seditious speeches, and the crime of walking off a job. Blacks could not preach in one state without police permission. A Mississippi law enacted late in November required blacks to have jobs before the second Monday in January. This was real life. Scenes in Memphis, Tennessee during the riot, burning of Freedman Schoolhouse, sketched by ARW. Y'all ever heard of the term Memphis in May before? You ever wonder where that came from? Let me show you right quick. What that say? May 1 through 3. Memphis in May, anyone? All right. Okay, let's continue. Illustration in Harper's Weekly of the Memphis Riot of 1866, Alfred Rudolph Wad, Harper's Weekly, 26 May 1866, Tennessee State Library and Archive. Even more serious was the vindictive attitude of Southerners who vented their frustration on unarmed blacks. General Carl Schurz, who made a special investigation for the president, was astonished by post war conditions in the South. Some planters, he said, held back their former slaves on their plantations by brute force. Armed bands of white men patrolled the country roads to drive back the Negroes wandering about. Dead bodies of murdered Negroes were found on and near the highways and byways. Gruesome reports came from hospitals. Reports of colored men and women whose ears had been cut off, whose skulls had been broken by blows, whose bodies had been slashed by knives or lacerated with scourges. A number of such cases I had occasion to examine myself. A reign of terror prevailed in many parts of the South. Throughout this period and on to the 1870s, hundreds of freedmen were massacred in riots, staged and directed by policemen and other government officials. In the Memphis, Tennessee riot of May 1866, 46 blacks, Union veterans were a special target, were killed, and 75 were wounded. Five black women were raped by whites, 12 schools and four churches were burned. 2 months later, in New Orleans, policemen returned to the attack, killing some 40 blacks and wounding 100. The emancipation of the slave, General Schurz concluded, is submitted to only in so far as chattel slavery in the old form could not be kept up. But although the freedman is no longer considered the property of the individual master, he is considered the slave of society. Wherever I go, the street, the shop, the house, the hotel, or the steamboat, I hear the people talk in such a way as to indicate that they are yet unable to conceive of the Negro as possessing any rights at all. Men who are honorable in their dealing with their white neighbors will cheat a Negro without feeling a single twinge of their honor. To kill a Negro, they don't deem murder. To debauch a Negro woman, they do not think fornication. To take property away from a Negro, they do not consider robbery. The people boast that when they get freedmen's affairs in their own hands, to use their own expression, the niggers will catch hell, quote unquote. All of these factors, Southern intransigence and arrogance, the black codes, the Memphis and New Orleans riots, changed the national mood. Here and there, Million fell into step with Sumner and Stevens. They did so for many reasons. Some believed it would be a major tragedy to hand the freedmen over to their former masters. Others saw a chance to ensure the continued supremacy of the Republican Party. Still, others believed it would be dangerous to return ex Confederates to national power. For various reasons, some of the contradictory, some of them noble, some of them base, people began to march by the sound of a different drummer. All right, so that is, I read over the Memphis Massacre, May 1, 2, 3, 1866. Yeah, you can guys do some research. If y'all feeling what I'm doing here, man, hit that like button, man, so it can, go through that algorithm, man. Bringing y'all, stuff that may have not been taught in schools. A lot of things I'm reading, first time hearing it. All right, we're going to do July 30, 1866, New Orleans Massacre. Shout out to Jet Life. All right, so July 30th, 1866, New Orleans Massacre. The New Orleans Massacre, also known as the New Orleans Riot, occurred on July 30, 1866. when white residents attacked black marchers gathered outside the Mechanics Institute, where the reconvened Louisiana Constitutional Convention met in response to the state legislature enacting black codes and limiting suffrage. As explained in Absolute Massacre, the 1866 riot at the Mechanics Institute. The parade marchers had thwarted off the mob on the other side of Canal, but once they made it to the Mechanics Institute, where the convention was taking place inside, they were beset by more violence. A gang of white supremacists and ex-Confederates attacked. Fire sirens went off, signaling police to attack. They were sent by the mayor. There was panic because the police and firemen armed surrounded that building and began advancing, says Carnan Cossie Bell. The attack was premeditated. Lead Police Chief Harry T. Hayes, what he was doing at the time was recruiting policemen from Confederate veterans. They stormed in and started shooting, chasing people down in the street. The brutal attack led to a total of 150 casualties, including 48 deaths, 48 African Americans, and three white radical Republicans. The New Orleans and Memphis riots strengthened the argument by radical Republicans, a faction in the Republican Party, that President Johnson's Reconstruction Plan was insufficient and greater protection of African Americans was needed. All right, so this is the July 30th, 1866 New Orleans massacre. And to highlight, the brutal attack led to a total of 150 casualties, including 48 deaths. Man, that's crazy. Whew. So history, man, that they don't teach you, that they consider critical race theory, but this is what actually happened in this nation. All right. How many more should I do? All right, I'm gonna leave it off right here at the Camilla Massacre. This will be the last one, and we'll do part 3 next time. September 19th, 1868, Camilla Massacre. The Camilla Massacre took place on September 19th, 1868, near Albany, Georgia. The massacre was one of many acts of repression carried out by white supremacists during the Reconstruction era to roll back advances in civic, economic, and human rights for African Americans. Here's a description from the Georgia Encyclopedia. In early September, the Georgia State Legislature expelled 28 newly elected members because they were at least 1/8 black. Among those removed was Southwest Georgia Representative Philip Joyner. On September 19th, Joyner, along with Northerners Francis F. Putney and William P. Pierce, led a 25-mile march of several hundred blacks and a few whites from Albany to Camilla, the Mitchell County seat, to attend a Republican political rally. Mitchell County whites, however, were determined that no Republican rally would occur. As marchers entered the courthouse square in Camilla, whites stationed in various storefronts opened fire, killing about a dozen and wounding possibly 30 others. As marchers returned to Albany, hostile whites assaulted them for several miles. And let's read this landmark here. In one of the most violent episodes in Reconstruction Georgia, a rally in Mitchell County in September 1868 resulted in about a dozen freedmen being killed and several dozen wounded. Georgia had been readmitted to the United States just 2 months prior, leading up to the terrible events of September 19th. White Democrats and Republicans in Georgia legislature expelled all 28 African American legislators. One of those expelled, Philip Joyner from Southwest Georgia, led several hundred freemen from Albany to Camilla for a rally in the Mitchell County seat. Upon arrival, the sheriff and other local whites opened fire. Many black voters stayed home for the 1868 election. 2 months later, news of the massacre circulated throughout the country, and Congress returned Georgia to the military occupation and further reconstruction. Erected by the Georgia Historical Society, Union Baptist Church, Mitchell County NAACP, branch number 524 5254 in Mitchell County High School class of 1980. Shout out. So you can read more at Camilla, Georgia Political Rally and Massacre and Black in Education about this. But hey, this is what I'm putting out there so people will know about what's been going on in this nation to where it developed a culture, right, that nobody wants to examine. But yet, Native Black Americans, they commit atrocities. It's definitely examined, cross-examined in many ways. So thank y'all for watching this, listening, hitting that like button, sharing this. Really appreciate it. Um, I'm gonna come back for part 3 of this so we can keep it going. I'm out, y'all.